sleeve is a little bit trickier to get right than what you might think, but I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm Ali and I've been pattern cutting and dressmaking since the dark days before the internet and YouTube tutorials. Back in the early 90s, I first went to college and learned how to make patterns and make clothes. I'm going to show you now how I made this dolman pattern.
You'll notice the sample I'm wearing doesn't have great drape. And that's because I tend to use a rigid fabric for my samples because it really shows up any fit issues.
There are various ways of doing this. And I always make sure with my videos, I want them to make sense to everybody, whether they love maths, hate maths, whether they've done lots of dressmaking or not. But also I want to make sure that they work for every body type.
You can see here in the sample that if I line the waist up here and I pull the shoulders up here, you can see all of this here, which you don't see when I'm wearing it. And that's because this isn't cut identical front and back, but you can see here all the space for the bust, and that's why this method of doing it is perfect if you've got a fuller bust.
So I'm going to start by just showing you the principle of the dolman sleeve, how we have the front piece and the back piece and the sleeve, and we need to turn these all into one pattern with no seam down here like you would normally have on a regular set-in sleeve, or up here like you would on a raglan. It's all just cut in one piece, and I've got a seam going down the sleeve here. So I'm going to demonstrate using a bodice block and a sleeve pattern, but you can use this principle and this technique with any pattern that you have. If you've got a sleeveless pattern and you want to add a dolman sleeve, then you can follow my sleeve tutorial to draft a basic sleeve. So once I've shown you this basic pattern, I'm then going to show you two more versions of the dolman sleeve. Once I've covered everything in the basic design, I'm going to show you how I made this second sample, which just has a different kind of dark detail here on the front, just to add an element of design to your pattern. And then I will show you how to do the pattern for this version with a lot more volume. So there's a lot more volume under the armhole here. It's all cut in one piece. There's no seam down the sleeve. You can cut this out of one bit of fabric. This is perfect for really drapey fabrics like this. So this video won't show you how to make a finished garment. This is all about making the pattern, and these are just basic samples with cut edges. Let's go ahead now and make the pattern for this basic dolman sleeve.
The first thing we need to understand is what the dolman sleeve actually is. So this is my front fitted bodice block and this is the back. And this is a basic sleeve pattern that I've drafted from this armhole. So when you're looking at a dolman, this is basically what it is. Your front and back meet at the shoulder, and then your sleeve is here, and then you need to make a pattern where there's just a seam going here, and then you don't have an armhole seam. You basically have a front piece, which is generally cut on the fold and then comes over into the front half of the sleeve. This is going to be split, and then exactly the same at the back. So we've obviously got this gap here, but with a dolman sleeve, it's not a close fitting garment. So I'm going to be adding some ease onto the block, and then I'm going to be shaping it like this. But it's always good to see, to start with, exactly the principle of it. So if I put these shoulder seams together, you'll see that this sleeve is much wider than what my armhole is on my bodice. I don't want to cut it like this because it's not going to fit great at the top here. I need to allow a little bit more space for the sleeve head. So there is some ease in this, so we could in effect take some out of that, but we don't want to be taking loads out. So what we do is we basically need to open this up to allow a little bit more space here, which leads into the sleeve, and then we shape the rest of it. So that's kind of the general principle of it. So there are various ways of drafting a dolman. If it's a really loose fitting dolman, you can literally just continue your shoulder line and draw the shape in. But if you want a bit more shape to it, you need to work with the pattern you've got to make sure it does actually fit. So I'm going to add some ease to this because a dolman isn't really something you generally use on a really close fitting garment. So I will add a little bit of ease to this. So some of the methods you might see, you continue the shoulder line, you change the slope a little bit just to add that little bit more movement, and then there's various calculations. But I like my videos to work for everybody. So whether you are petite or very curvy, whether you have a large bust compared to your shoulder, or you're more straight up and down. I want it to work for everyone. And I think the best way of doing this is just to look at the dolman as a whole, rather than drafting the back and then the front and then looking at the sleeve. So let's look at the whole thing together. I need to add my sleeve on in a minute, but I want to do a couple of adaptations to the actual block before I do that. Even though I'm doing this with a block, you can do this with an existing pattern. It's all the same principle. So the first thing I want to do, because I'm doing alterations around the shoulder and the armhole and all of this top area, I don't want to have these darts at the top. As you get a bit more experience, you can work around the darts, but I think if it's something you've not done before, let's just get those darts out of the way before we start. If you're familiar with moving darts, then this is going to be very straightforward for you. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this dart that goes into my shoulder down to the bottom out of the way. It doesn't mean that that's where my dart's going to be necessarily in my finished garment, but just for the beginning of this process of doing the dolman, it's just an easy way to get that out of the way of the top. So that's now out of the way. Let's just cut that excess off. And then we don't have to worry about working around that dart as we do the sleeve. Now with the back dart, I don't want to be doing anything as far down as this, but I do want to just close that dart up. And all I'm going to do is cut there, and then I'm just going to draw a line into my armhole, and I'm going to just cut along here. And then I'll just tape that together. So we've opened up a dart here, but we're going to be bringing this sleeve out and making it quite loose anyway, so we don't really need to worry about that. So that's my front and back now without any darts on the shoulder getting in my way. So these now are the same length. If I do that, they're exactly the same length. So that's step one. And this is now how it looks when I place it all here. So we just need to now, as I said before, think of this as a whole. So we want the neck to join up. We don't want to be adding any gaping on the neck at all. And then we need to get the rest of this all to fit. So you want the length to be correct. So you want the top of your sleeve to touch that shoulder point there. And I already said at the beginning, we need to open this up a little bit. Well, we've already opened it up here a little bit. So we only need to now open it up a little bit more here. And then once we've done that, we need to just think about how this goes on here. So what you want, you need your side seam on your bodice and your inner sleeve seam. You need those to match up because the front and the back are obviously going to join together. So what you need to do is center this piece so that the distance from here to here on both sides is the same, and everybody's are going to look slightly different because everyone's proportions are slightly different. But that's why I wanted to demonstrate it like this rather than doing the pieces individually, because it's a bit more of a one size fits all approach. So the length, as I said, needs to be correct. So you've got your shoulder length here and then your sleeve length. So you need this to line up with the front shoulder. Don't worry about the back one because we've changed the shape of that a little bit and everyone's, again, is going to be slightly different. So that needs to line up here, and then you need this distance to be the same on either side. And don't worry about the centre point of this sleeve just yet. But this line here is literally drawn down the centre of the sleeve. If you don't already have a sleeve block, then you can draft the sleeve from my sleeve tutorial, link above and below. When you're doing it, you don't even necessarily need to worry about drawing the sleeve head in perfectly because we're not really going to be using this. You need to make sure the sleeve head height is correct. You need to make sure the sleeve length is correct. And crucially, you need to make sure the top of the arm is correct here. And don't worry so much about getting the curve perfect. These are the main bits. I'm going to just stick this to the table where I want it. You're not going to be doing that, but it's easier for me to demonstrate it. So I need my neck to stay the same. I've already opened up this armhole a little bit there, and I'm just going to do a little bit more here. You want approximately 3 centimetres in total between the two. So let's just stick that down there to hold it in place. You can do it like this if you want to, or you can just do it over some paper and then trace it. So that's that bit done, and I'm going to just put a little bit there just to hold that down. So the next thing I need to do is I need to make sure this is in the right position here, and I need to make sure these distances are exactly the same. So you need to just kind of measure from the midpoint there to the midpoint there and just make sure that's the same. For this side, that measures about 4 centimetres, and that side's about the same. So that's in the right position there. The distance there is the same on both sides, and this lines up with this point here. You want to make sure that lines up across there. So I'm going to stick this down in a few places, and then once I've done that, I can let go knowing that that's all correct. And there we go. That's the general shape of my dolman. So we've got a bigger gap there than we have there, and that's just down to the armhole shaping, because my armhole is just that little bit more cut out at the front there. Everyone's, again, is going to be slightly different based on your body shape. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to decide where my shoulder seam is going to be, and then take that down into the arm. So where this point is here on the neck, I'm just going to bring it forward very slightly to here. It's, I would say, just under 1 centimetre. I'm just doing that by eye, so it's 8 millimetres. And then I need to work out where I think the shoulder seam needs to be here. So this is my original front, and then we've got this extra bit here, and then the original back, we've already added a fair bit in here. So I don't really want to go to the midpoint here. So I think going there could be a good position. So that's where I want my shoulder line to be. I can't draw on top of this tape, so let's just use a red pen to do that. So I'm gonna just put that there and there. That's where I feel like my shoulder line needs to be. But I also need to continue it all the way down to the bottom of the sleeve. Now, it's not quite all in shot, so let's just pull that up for a second. And basically the bottom point of my sleeve here is where I need to draw that to. I've just flipped this around for a second so you can see the whole length of the sleeve. So I've basically got my new point of the shoulder here and here, and then I want to join that up with this centre point of the sleeve at the bottom. And I could say that was really good planning, but actually it's just a fluke that when I line it up with the bottom there and this neck point, it actually lines up with this point that I've drawn here. So this is where I'm gonna put my sleeve seam to start with. So it means that the back sleeve is slightly bigger than the front sleeve, but we need to see how this looks on, and we can always adjust that once we've done it. So what I need to do now is I'm going to cut up this line here, and then I can tweak my sleeve very slightly. So I'm just going to cut straight up this new line. And now what I can do is I can pull that around a little bit. So I'm going to flip my phone back the other way and then show you how to do that. Now that my sleeve's in 2 pieces, I'm going to think about my front and back separately. So this red line here is where the shoulder is going to be. And I can now flip this around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get that tape off there. And I'm not going to flip it around by much. I don't want this point to actually meet here. I'm just going to bring it around very slightly. And as you can see, it just changes the angle here a little bit. So it's just going from there and just opening up just a little bit. So if you're looking at where the sleeve head is here, basically where the line goes across from the armhole, I've opened that up by, it's only 0.5 centimetre, but it just adds a little bit of an angle here. And I'm going to do exactly the same on this side. And I'm just going to reposition this here. So I've ended up with a little bit of overlap here, but don't worry about that because we're going to be draping this on the body as well to get the shape perfect. So I'm just going to stick that down there to make sure that all stays in place. So the next thing I need to do is add my ease into my bodice and my sleeve and draw this shape in here. Now that I've got all of this opened up, everything positioned, all of these angles changed, I can now think about the front and the back separately. So what I'm going to do for the basic shape is I'm going to have it cut on the fold for the centre front and the centre back, and then I'm going to have a seam going all the way down here and around here. So I'm going to trace off the back and I'm going to trace off the front, and I need to make sure these match up perfectly here. Then once I've done that and I've made a sample, I can do any tweaks that that I need to do. So I'm going to leave this stuck down here and I'm going to put my paper over it to trace it off. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to think about how much ease to add in, which means reducing these darts a little bit. It means bringing out the side seam and then drawing in the dolman shape here. So what I need to do now, I'm afraid the bottom of the sleeve is out of shot, but it just continues down, just a regular sleeve shape. So I'm going to place this on here. Make sure you don't do like I've done and cut your bit of paper too small. I'm going to have to stick a little bit on the end of mine. And I hope this all shows up really well. But what you want to be doing is lining up. If you've got dot and cross, then it makes it a lot easier. But I'm going to line my dot and cross up with my centre back seam here. And I am literally going to trace all the way around the back piece. So I'm going to just do a continual tracing up the centre back, around the neck, down this new shoulder line that I've drawn in here, down the back sleeve seam and around. And I'm going to just draw this exactly as it is for now. And then I'm going to do the adjustments once I've got this traced off. And I'll do exactly the same on the front. So I'll trace those off now and then show you what I have. All I do when I'm tracing anything off like this, if there's any straight lines, I just draw the end points. So I've got the end point up here and down here, and then I can just use a ruler to draw that rather than tracing all that freehand. The same with the darts. I've marked the points at the bottom and this point at the top. When it comes to where the side seam meets the sleeve, hopefully you can see that through there. Let's just lift this up. So at this point here, I've just marked the point where both lines meet up here. And I've marked the top of my sleeve and the bottom down here, just to get that into shot. This is the bottom of my sleeve, my little bit I had to stick on because I didn't cut my paper quite big enough. And I've just drawn all of these points on, but I can now join all this with a ruler. Now, don't worry that it's going to be dead straight lines for now, because we're going to do adjustments with that in a minute. So I'm now going to just join all my little bits up here. The only bit that I've actually had to draw in with a curve is my neck. So I'm just going to join all of these up and I'll do exactly the same process on the front. And then we can have a look at these new pieces. So this is my back piece now traced off with all the details. As you can see, it doesn't look like the dolman yet, but we're getting there. And the same with the front. So I can now take these off the table, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep them stuck the way they are, just in case this doesn't work out, and I can really easily go back to square one and have another look at this. So I'm just going to really carefully lift it off with all these little bits of tape attached, and then if I flip it over, all I've got to do where all these bits are is just put another bit of tape there so they're not sticky and they don't get stuck to my table or the floor or wherever I put these in the meantime. So we're not going to need this ultimately, but I always think it's a good idea to hang on to anything like this if something doesn't work out, so you can question what you did, or you can just rejig it from here. It should be a lot easier now to see what I've traced off now that I haven't got that underneath. I want to add some ease to the body because with a dolman you generally don't have it as fitted as this. I'm going to keep my sleeve as it is at the bottom width-wise because I want that to be quite tight, and then I need to think about this shape. That's obviously the key bit. And then the other thing I need to think about is this angle here. If I join this up here with my back, which I can't really do till I've cut them out, it's gonna have a point. So I need to just curve this. But let's take this one step at a time. I don't want to cut this out completely because I'm going to be playing around with different things. But one thing I'm not going to do is change this until at least I've done my sample. So the first thing I can do is cut all of this off, both my front and back, and then I can see a lot better what I've got. Now already that's a lot easier to see. So front and back. The first thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of ease in from the waist up to the armhole. So I'm going to do this both on the darts and on the side seam. So let's just put the front aside and have a look at the back first. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce this dart a little bit. I'm not going to take loads off the dart because I don't want this to be really loose fitting. I just don't want it to be as fitted as it is. So I'm going to take 4mm off each side of that dart. And then I'm just going to rub that out and I'm going to just join those up to the top point of my dart. that's going to bring it in slightly less at the back waist. And then I'm just going to bring this out a little bit here. I'm going to bring it out at the side seam here, 0.5 centimetre. And I'm going to bring it out 1 centimetre at the top here. So that's just giving me a little bit more ease on that bodice. And whereas I've brought this out 1 centimetre here, I'm going to do exactly the same with my sleeve, but I'm going to keep it in the same place at the bottom. So I'll just rub out the previous line. So how much ease you add in is totally down to how you want this to fit. But this isn't designed to be super baggy. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. So that is my back piece now with the ease added in. I just need to do exactly the same with the front. So I took 4mm out of my dart on the back. I'm going to do slightly more at the front because this is really fitted. So I'm going to take 6mm out of that and just make that dart a little bit smaller, just so it's not quite so fitted on the front there. And then just rejoin that up to that point. I need to just do exactly the same here as what I did on the back. And now I can just rub those previous lines out. That's all my ease now added on my side seam of my front and back and my inner sleeve seam. Now that I've added the ease in, I've got the fit that I want, I've got this shape here, I need to now think about the dolman. So again, let's put the front aside for a minute and let's look at the back. So it's totally up to you how much you want to put in here. If you stay too tight up here, you're not going to have any movement at all in this dolman. So I'm going to bring this down a fair bit. And then when I try my sample on, if I decide I want that to go up a little bit more, so it's not quite so low on the armhole, then I can easily bring it up, but I can't bring it down easily on the sample. So I'm going to draw this point here, from this point here to here, 5.5 centimetres, and I'm going to just curve that in here, and I'm going to do it to the halfway point on the sleeve here, and then you want it to be similar on the sleeve, but all of this shaping is just completely down to how you want it. You can bring this down a little bit further if you like, and certainly on the sleeve you could bring it down further, but you just don't want to go too high up here because it's just not going to be so comfortable. So that's my new position there. I need this to match perfectly with my front, and the easiest way to do that is to literally lay this on top and trace that shape. So this point here, this is my sleeve seam, this point here I need to match up with the same point on the front, and I need to line up my sleeve and trace this curve in here. So I'll do that first. And then obviously I've got different angles because of the darts. I'm going to do the same with this point here. And I'm going to line that up there and draw that curve in. So if I now put the back aside, I don't know how well you can see that through on the video, but I can see that quite well. I'm just going to draw in this curve. So the front and back are going to be slightly different because obviously we've got different dart sizes, and you can see straight away this angle is very different to this angle. So the last thing I need to do to make sure that these are going to join perfectly is I need to make sure they measure the same. The most accurate way to measure a curve like this is to use your tape measure, start it off at one end and hold it up on its side and just follow that line. And just go around the curve and take your time getting that perfect. This is a much better way than doing it with a ruler. And then make a note of this one and then do exactly the same on the other piece. And then I just need to compare them and make sure they're actually gonna join up. If they're very slightly different, you can ease them in, but if there's a lot of difference, you're gonna need to change the pattern. I've measured both of mine. So my back measures 41.5 centimetres and my front 39.6. So there's a difference of 1.9 centimetres, which is too much to add in with some ease. So I'm just going to do a couple of adjustments just to make this one very slightly longer. I don't want to play around with this curve. I want to keep that as it is for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down a little bit here, because it's not going to make a massive difference to how this fits down here, but it's going to add a little bit of length to this measurement. So I just did that by eye, so that's 3 millimeters. So this is now 39.9. And this angle here actually doesn't look great anyway. So I'm going to add a little bit to that. And again, I'm going to do that by eye. I'm going to do that to there. And that's 5 millimeters. So we've now got 40.4 centimeters. So we've only got the difference of a centimetre now. Now that there's only about a centimetre difference between the front and the back, I know I can ease half a centimetre in very easily. When I correct the angles of this sleeve, I just want to either take half a centimetre off the back on this length here or add it to the front. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut out this curve here on both pieces. I've cut that out, but I've actually decided to cut all of this out as well. So it's all cut out around here. The only thing I've not done is the bottom of this sleeve. It's just a lot easier for you to see what I'm doing. So I need to just make sure these are the same length within a few millimeters. So if I lay one on top of the other here, we can see without taking any measurements exactly what we've got, and I'm just going to follow that around. They're different shapes because obviously we are different shaped on the front to on the backs of our bodies. So I'm going to follow that around there, and you can see here this is the centimetre I'm talking about, where the bottom of this sleeve joins this one. That's the centimetre difference we've got. So if that distance there is just a tiny bit, you're really easily going to be able to ease this on. But what you don't want to do is ease it on too much, because you're going to end up with a bit of a funny seam under your arm. So I need to just correct this a little bit more. So if I now get these pieces, what I don't want to do is change anything on this outer seam here, because this is a perfect straight line. These are perfect right angles. What I need to do is change it on this side. So it's my front that I need to add a bit onto, or my back that I need to take a little bit off. The back currently is longer than the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position these together. So these are the two sides of the inside seam that ultimately get sewn up together. And at the moment it's about a centimetre difference, which that is close enough. And I'm just going to tape those two together like that. And then all I need to do is just make this a good shape. I need to keep the right angle here and here. And this is my outer sleeve, which I'm going to just join using this for a perfect curve. So let's just draw over that now. And that is a much more natural shape. In fact, it's still a little bit pointy. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit here, and then I'm going to cut that out and see how it looks. And there we go, that's a much better shape for the inside of the sleeve seam. So let's just separate those again. And that's now my front and my back. The only way I can get them both on screen is to overlap them a little bit like this, but this is roughly what you should have. So if you've got a fuller bust, you're going to have a more extreme angle here and maybe a bigger dart here, and that's going to affect the angles of all of these different things. So that's why one video with a few measurements telling you to extend lines and giving you measurements just doesn't work for everyone. So looking at this from a whole, we started off with our two pattern pieces and our sleeve, and this is what we've ended up with. So if we go back to what we started with, we had our back piece here. We've obviously added some ease. We've got our front piece. We've got rid of these darts at the top and added some ease in, which has brought that around. And then this is our sleeve piece here, and we've filled this in. So you can see now how that relates back to those original pieces. So I'm ready now to make a sample of this and try it on. And this is the bit that's absolutely essential. Doing something like a dolman, you can get the general shape of it with flat pattern cutting, but you need to see how it drapes on the body. Let's just turn them this way again for a second. You can't guess how that's going to fit going around here like this. We don't know if that's going to be too tight, too restrictive, too low. We don't know if that angle's going to be exactly right. This is just a really good start to then drape it on your body. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to find a piece of fabric and I'm going to make a sample of this. I'm going to cut my front and back on the fold, and then the only seams I've got is, I need to just do the darts, and then I've just got to join the outer sleeve here, and then I need to join along this seam here, and I can try it on and see how it fits. The very last thing I'm going to do before I make my sample is I'm just going to open this neck up a little bit, because with a dolman it's not really the kind of design you normally have a really tight neck like this. So you can open that up as much or as little as you want. If you open this up quite a lot, then you need to think about gaping on the neck. So it's worth taking a look at my necklines video as well if you want to do that. But if you're just taking off a little bit like this, it's not really going to add any gape, but it just makes this sample a little bit better to see. So just make sure this lines up on this seam here so that everything matches up. I'm going to cut my front on the fold, and I'm going to put a seam at the centre back for now, just so I can leave a little opening here so I can get it over my head. Once you're making an actual design, you have to consider whether you need an opening or not on the neck on this, or whether you can cut both front and back on the fold. But that's something to think about with each individual design. What we're concentrating on here is this sleeve shape. So I'm just going to get this sample made up now so I can see how it fits.
So this is how it fits. Now, unfortunately, this fabric was a little bit see-through, so I have had to put it on over a dress, but it doesn't really matter because it's not a really tight fitting garment, so it's not really made a difference. So I'm really happy with how this fits. I'm really happy with this shape. I feel like the balance from front to back is right. This seam is in the right place. I'm really happy generally with all of it. The only thing I'm going to change is this neck here. You can see it's not sitting flat to my shoulder. I can't see in the mirror, so it's kind of hard to point this out without seeing, but this bit here, basically, it's just sticking up a little bit, so I just need to take a little bit off there. So I've just stepped away and looked in the mirror, and I've put a pin here where I'm going to fix it. So I'll show you in a second how I'm going to do that on the pattern, but that's really all that I'm going to do. So as I said, just double check all of the fit. Make sure you're happy with how it fits down the sleeve, you're happy with the shape, the dolman shape here, and you can just play around with the pattern if you're not happy with it, adding or taking out ease, making this higher or lower, making the shape a little bit different. You can taper the sleeves, you can do all of those adjustments to your pattern, but hopefully you're pleased with how your dolman sleeve fits. So I'm going to show you the amendments now on the pattern for this, and I'm just going to stitch this how it should be, and then I'll try it on again to see the difference.
So the only thing I'm going to change fit-wise, as I just said, is this shoulder slope here. And this is one of the great reasons for keeping your original piece. I can see from here exactly where that shoulder point is. So I'm just going to mark that on the front and the back. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just lining the neck back up again here. I'm just marking where the shoulder position is. I can't get in there. And the whole reason I want to do that is because I want to change this angle to take a little bit of that shoulder slope off where it was sticking up, but I don't want it to affect the sleeve. So I only need this to be changed by a tiny little bit. I'm just doing this by eye. So I'm just drawing that little bit in there, and then I want to draw a line from the shoulder point over to here, and that's it. That's my little amendment to get that neck sitting properly. So if I just trim these little bits off, you'll see how this has changed. And this is something that you can try and do it on the paper first, but actually as soon as you put it on your body, you just know. So if I line my sleeves back up, you can just see that there's a little bit more of a difference in angle here. And that's just going to make all the difference of getting that neck to sit properly. So fit-wise, that's the only amendment I'm going to do on mine. What you want to be looking at on yours is the depth of this here, just generally how it fits, if you want to add or take out any ease, the neck, all of that stuff. But fingers crossed, if you've followed the video exactly the same and you've done the same kind of amendments, then yours will fit really well as well. If it really doesn't fit well at all, then this is why I said to keep your original piece here, because you can refer back to exactly what you did from this to this. So just make sure, just follow step by step, that you've done all the amendments you need to do. You need to think about where this seam is going down here. So it might be a case of moving that over. Sometimes it's better to amend this and just kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit. And sometimes you can just do small amendments on this. But fingers crossed yours fits as well as mine does.
And this is how it now looks with the amendment. So I've just adjusted that seam exactly how I just showed with the pattern. So it shows that by having the change of angle here, it does make a difference. If I'd have done this in a completely straight line, it would have sat up at the neck or the sleeve wouldn't have laid flat. So it's really important to get that right. And that's why it's important to look at this on the body, not just looking at the paper pattern. So hopefully you don't need to do many more adjustments yourself and you now have a great dolman pattern. Now let's have a look at this second sample. So I've not changed the fit of this. All I've done is just open the neck up a little bit, and I don't know how well you can see it on, but you'll soon see when I show you the pattern, is that I've put some darts down here just to make it a bit more interesting than a straightforward dart. But you need to do any kind of darting like this once you've done your sleeve design. You don't want to be doing all of this around the darts. So I'll show you now how I made this second sample.
So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the neck. So I'm going to just open up a little bit here. I'm just doing this by eye. I know roughly how I want this to look. And I want to go a little bit wider here as well. And then what I need to do is make sure that that shape works with the back. So I want to come down a little bit at the back and go wide here. And then I just need to make sure where this joins at this point here, that it's a nice shape. I don't want it pointing in or pointing out this way. So that's just a nice shape. And I'm just going to scoop that out a little bit more there. So you can do with this whatever you want. You just need to make sure if you're opening it up like this, you take into account that it could make it a little bit more gapey. So let's just do the front and the back separately. So I'm going to cut this little bit off the back. And I feel like that's going to make it a little bit gapey. So I need to take a little bit out from that neck, just a little tiny dart, just to make sure that doesn't gape. Now, I don't really want to be playing around with this too much because I know this fits really well. And we're only talking about the tiniest little bit. So for this, it's only 2 millimeters. I'm just going to take it off of my shoulder here. I don't want to be cutting into this for the sake of 2 millimeters and changing how that all fits. And then what I'm going to do for my front, let's put the back aside for now, is I'm going to cut this off. And I need to take a little bit out of there, but I'm going to be playing around with these darts anyway. So I am just going to draw a line down from, it's kind of just to the right of the halfway point here, down to my bust point here. And now I need to think about where these darts are going to look nice for this to be a really nice top. I don't want my dart to be going right across into this little bit of the dolman, but it's absolutely fine to put it onto this seam here. The reason I didn't do this before was because I want to get that shape right before I start thinking about the styling. So you kind of need to do it in 2 processes. So I've drawn a line from the bust point just down to just below where that dolman curve is. And then my second dart, because I just don't want this to be a regular, just standard, straight up from the waist to the bust point dart, I'm going to draw this one at a bit of an angle as well. And you don't have to do this, but it's just, I think, a bit of a funky design. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close up this dart at the bottom and I'm going to overlap this at the top, literally by a couple of millimeters, just to get rid of any gaping from where I've opened up that neck a little bit. So let's just do one at a time. So I've overlapped this literally, because it's only a tiny bit I've taken off it. I've just done that by a couple of millimeters, so let's stick that in place. And now I need to close up this dart. That was the original one I had there. And I can open up these two darts. So let's just do one at a time. I'm going to open that up. And this is where it could get a little bit confusing. So just remember what is what. So I'm going to close that one up. That's my original one that was quite wide. And by changing this into two darts rather than the one, it means it makes a nicer shape on the bust. It's not going to be pointy. So let's just get rid of that little bit as well, just to avoid any confusion. You don't need to be quite this particular when you're doing it, but for a demonstration, I want to make sure nobody gets confused. And then I'm just going to open up this second dart as well. And then I'm just going to position that like that. And I've got two new darts here instead. And it's just going to make it, I think, a much cooler design. So all I need to do now is just use a couple of bits of scrap paper, or you can just put one big piece behind both of these. And I'm just going to stick these together so I don't have a pattern that's lots of little bits of paper flapping around. So all I need to do is fold this and think about which direction you're going to press your dart. So I'm going to press it to the side. So I'm just going to fold this, join it to where it's going to join up to there. And the easiest way is just to cut that all in one piece. And when you open it up, you've got your dart shape. So I'm just going to do exactly the same on this other one. That's both of those darts now done. So just make sure you know which ones. If I just draw this with a different colour, then I know exactly what's what. And if in doubt, if it gets confusing with lots of lines, you can always draw in an arrow like that, so you know which are the darts and which are now redundant lines. And then the last thing you want to do is you don't want these darts going right to the bust point, because it's not a good look, unless that's what you want, which obviously if that's the look you want, then do that. But generally you want them to stop just a little bit shy of where the bust point is. So I generally do this by eye. So that's 2.5 centimetres or an inch. That's a good general kind of position for where you want them. And then you don't have to redraw the whole points of the darts in. You've got your bottom pieces and your top bit, which is enough to be able to do it. But if you want your pattern to look perfect, then just draw those in to finish it off. This could now start getting a little bit confusing if you're not used to doing this. So at this stage, you could now trace off this completely, get rid of any lines that you don't want, and draw these darts in perfectly. But that's basically what I've got now for my finished pattern for a basic dolman top with a more interesting dart detail and a nicer cutout neck. So now with those little amendments, just fixing the neck, cutting it out more and moving the darts, let's make a top up in this, just a basic sample, but in a much nicer drapier fabric, and see how it looks. So that's both of the more fitted versions of the dolman done. So let's finally have a look at what we need to do with the pattern to make this much more full version. So obviously it comes down a lot more under the armhole here, and there's a lot more fabric. So this is literally cut in one piece. So it's a straight line across the arms, and you'll see in a second how I do this. So you don't necessarily have to go down this route to do this pattern. You don't have to do a fitted sample to then make a sample with more volume, but if you've already got that and you want more volume, this is how you do it. And also, if you are quite full on the bust and small on the shoulders, then just drafting without doing it this way, you might struggle to get the balance right. Doing it this way, as long-winded as it is, it does help make sure that it's all balanced. So if you're big busted, you're gonna need a longer distance on the front to the back. And if you're just drawing it the same front and back, which is how sometimes these kind of patterns are drafted, it's not going to fit great. This way also ensures that it's got enough room across the bust here. As I said before, this design is absolutely perfect for really drapey fabrics. This is a stretch crepe back satin, and you can see it just flows really lovely. It also works great for knit fabrics that have a lot of drape as well. If you've got a slightly stiffer or more bulky fabric, this probably isn't going to be right for you. And then the last thing is you are restricted to the size of the fabric you have. You need to cut it in one piece. So if you are tall,
I've got really short arms because I'm very short, but if you're tall and the length from here to here is quite long, then you're going to struggle to get this out of one piece of fabric. So that's just one other thing to take into account when you're doing this.
So what we want to do is we want to have the sleeves joined in one piece, and we need the centre front and the centre back lining up, so then this can all be cut in one piece of fabric. Your only restriction is if your piece of fabric is wide enough to do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace off these pieces because I want to be cutting them up and moving them around, and I don't want to adjust this pattern because I like this and I'm going to want to use this again. So I'm going to trace this off and then I will show you exactly what to do. Now, you don't have to go through the process of getting this really well fitting before making a looser top, but it's always good to see the thought process of how a looser top is made. It's going to be a pretty basic shape, but I'll show you from this how you can get that basic shape that still fits you really well. It's important that loose tops still fit you in the right places. And if you are particularly curvy, that can be one of the more tricky things to make sure the balance from the front to the back is right. So let's just work through the amendments one bit at a time to turn this into a much looser fitting one-piece pattern, perfect for really drapey fabrics. I want to cut this in one piece. So this line and this line on both pieces need to be perpendicular. So basically a right angle here. So the way I'm going to do this on both pieces, I'll show you on the back and I'll do exactly the same on the front, is I want to find a midpoint on that armhole. You don't need to measure it, just look and see where looks the midpoint. And you want to take that up at roughly a 45-degree angle to the top here. And then I'm going to cut up here, and this is going to add a lot of fullness to this underarm piece here. So that's going to really open it up like this. So I need to make sure that that is exactly a right angle. I've got my slight bump there where I shaped my sleeve, and I want to get rid of that, but we're opening it up so much that I can literally draw a straight line from top to bottom to get rid of that. So I'm just going to join from the neck edge to the bottom of the sleeve, and it's going to take this piece off here, which looks like quite a bit, but because what we're adding in here, it just really doesn't affect the fit at all. So let's just take that off so we know that that is a straight line. So I'll just add at this stage, so I've just noticed I've not cut that on my line, it doesn't matter, but I'm just going to add at this stage that to do it all in one piece, we need that to be a right angle. If you want a really, really funky, super drapey batwing sleeve, the more you pull that up, the more fabric you're going to end up with here. And you could literally just curve this right out. You can really play around with design with this technique. But for this, I want to cut it in one piece, and I'm going to be restricted to the size of my fabric. So I need to make sure this is a right angle. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bit of my dot and cross, and if you haven't got that, then you can use a ruler that's got right angled lines on or anything like that, but you just need to know that that's a right angle. So I'm just lining this up perfectly with the dot and crosses. And then what I'm going to do, because I'm going to play around with this neck in a minute, so it doesn't matter if I've got a bit of paper stuck behind it, is I'm just going to stick that together like that for now. And don't worry about the rest of it. I'm going to now do exactly the same on my front. And this is how it looks with both of these pieces opened up to form that into a perfect right angle. So if I put them like that, this is my front and this is my back. You can see this has had to open up a lot more than this. So this inside seam is now not going to measure the same. It's going to be bigger on the back than the front. But the great thing is I want to get rid of these darts because with a big baggy top, I don't need darts. And by doing that, it's going to open this front up even more. So let's put the back aside for now. As I said, you don't need to go through this lengthy process if you're not starting with a fitted top. You can almost draw this freehand because it's such a loose shape. But going through the thought process of doing this just helps you understand what's going on when it comes to these kind of tops. So what I want to do now, I've drawn both, when I traced it off, I drew these both back to the bust point so I could close these up nice and easily. So I'm just going to do that with both of these. I'm going to cut up one side of each of them, and then I'm just going to close those up. And now having done that, it's obviously not laying flat, so the easiest way to get it to lay flat is just to cut across here. I'm not even going to draw a line, I'm just going to freehand cut that to that bust point there. And that opens it up and I'm just going to stick that back down. So that's the front all now opened up, and I need to make sure this is the same as the back. So let's look at the back again. And just like the front, I've got this dart that I want to get rid of. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. So I've now got no darts to contend with at all. What I'm going to end up with is a shape that looks pretty basic, but I know it's going to have the right proportions to go around my bust, around my arm, all of those places. So now what I need to do is I need to compare the length of this inner seam. So I'm going to just put these like this so you can see a little bit better. So my table's not quite big enough to lay them completely flat and it all fit on the screen. But if I lay them like that, you can see there's really not much in it at all for the total length there. And this is our inside seam that needs to join up. And as I said before, if it's only different by a few millimetres, then that's going to ease in really easily anyway. Now I can only assume that looking at this like now, it's starting to look a little bit confusing. So what I'm going to do now, just to simplify this, is let's sort the neck out first. So I'm just going to stick that down again there. And I just want to open this up a little bit, just because it's a big baggy top. I don't want it to have a tight neck. So that's the new position of my neck there. If I make sure that's all stuck down, I can just trim that off. And I'm going to just do exactly the same on the front. So let's just take that all off in one piece here. That's the back neck done. And then I've got this little piece here that I can make sure I've kept the same measurements here on my front. So that's my shoulder. Doesn't matter about the centre front. And I just need to do this. I'm not going to worry about darting it with any gaping because I'm only taking a little bit off. And now I can just trim all of this excess off so that this pattern looks a lot less confusing. At this stage, I would absolutely recommend putting an F and a B on your pattern pieces because it can start getting really confusing with what is what. But that's now hopefully a lot clearer to see. Now the neck is trimmed and I've cut some of the excess off. So this is the sleeve here. And I just need to stick that together. So make sure you're happy with the neck shape. Make sure it all lines up perfectly at the neck edge because that's all going to be one piece. And I'm just going to stick this together because it's all going to be cut in that one piece. I've obviously not taken the bump off that perfectly. Let's just stick that together there. And hopefully you'll take your bump off when I'm demonstrating things. I sometimes stick them down badly. So that's now stuck together there. And this just doesn't meet by a couple of millimetres. I've obviously just cut that not quite accurately. So let's just trim the excess off there. And we've now got one big piece. So this is our front, our back and our sleeve, all ready to be cut in one piece. And if I put my ruler there, these should all line up perfectly. And if they don't, you just need to rejig it a little bit so that that is a straight line. The last bit I need to do is just finish off this. Don't worry about all of these bits you've opened up because this is all just going to add to the lovely folds that go in this batwing sleeve. So what I'm going to do, let's just start with back. I need to just fill this in and draw my new shape in. So as usual, I'm just going to use a piece of my scrap paper. And I'm just going to stick that together in a couple of places. And I literally just need to draw that as one continual curve. It's as simple as that. You can go all the way down to the waist if you want, or you can come up a little bit. But that is going to add loads more gathering there. And if you want it to sit lower on the body, you can even bring it down a little bit further as well. It's all down to where you want that armhole to sit. But I don't want mine to come down too low. I want lots of gathering, but I still want it sitting in the same kind of position because the lower down it goes, the more it's going to restrict your movement. So I'm just going to cut this off And I'm going to stop it there on the sleeve. Let's just move that out of the way. And that is my batwing shape. So I'm just going to put a few more bits of tape on just to hold that in place. Once this is all done and you know it fits, you can just trace this onto one sheet. But this is the process behind it. So all I need to do now is the same on the front, but I need it to be the same overall measurement as the back. The shape of it might be slightly different. We're obviously having to fit over the bust. We don't want to make this too tight across here so it fits perfectly. So I'm going to use another piece of scrap paper. So all I'm going to do is just join these bits on, and I'm going to just by eye go across my sleeve, and this is the point where I want to start curving it out from here, and I've gone pretty much to my waist there. So I'm going to do the same here. I've not taped this down yet because obviously once there's tape on it, I can't draw over it. Now what I don't want to do is shave off too much of this. A little tiny corner of that is going to be fine. If I come in too much, it might then not fit across the body, which I really don't want on something that is designed to be nice and loose. So I'm going to just draw that in where I feel that shape is good. And now I can stick this down in a couple more places. And I'm just going to cut that out. And that's it. That's now all cut out. I'm going to cut this in one piece. This is going to go on the fold. This is my sleeve seam. I literally am going to have one piece that I just join the front and the back up here. So now that that's done, the last thing I need to do is make sure that these are the same size. And the best way to do this, rather than measuring, is to literally line them up. So I'm going to start at the waist. And I'm just going to lay these on top of each other, working my way around how they are going to sit. And the reason they're a different shape is because of body shape. So that's actually quite a difference. So my front is a little bit bigger than my back, and I need to get these more similar or it's not going to go together properly. The reason for this is that I have quite a small back and a more curvy bust, so I need to just get these the same size within about 1 centimetre. If it's 1 centimetre difference, you can ease that on, no problem. So let's work out exactly how much different they are. So let's just do this a bit more accurately this time now that I know they are quite different. And this is where, if you just draw it without this process, it could end up unbalanced. By doing this, I know that this will fit perfectly to my shape. So that's my difference there. So 2.5 centimetres is the difference between the length of this and the length of this. Within 1 centimetre, I'm fine to ease it on. A lot of that depends on what fabric you're using. The lighter the fabric, the easier you can ease it on, but you don't want to be easing too much on because it could end up looking a bit strange with gathers on this seam. So you just need to figure out what you can do just to make that measurement more similar. So the difference is 2.5 centimetres. I've got more on the front than the back. I'm happy easing 1 centimetre on. So I just want that difference to be maximum 1.5 centimetres. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of both. I am going to take a little bit off the front and I'm going to add a little bit on the back. I don't want to play around with this sleeve because I really like that shape. I'm not going to play around with this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust this waist here. Hopefully this is making sense. So 3/4 centimetre, I'm going to take off here and I'm going to do that on a slight curve. And that's only the littlest bit. It's not going to affect the fit because we've added all of this in here. Let's just make sure that's stuck together properly there. So I take that little sliver off there. And then if I add it on here, the difference between my front and back curve is only 1 centimetre. So you don't literally need to cut it off one side and put it on the other, but this is just to show you how I'm doing it. I've worked out what the difference is that I want. I've halved that amount and I've literally cut it off the longer piece And I'm sticking that little sliver onto the shorter piece. I don't really like working with little slivers like this, but I thought that might help that make sense. So this one is now a little bit shorter, this one is a little bit longer. The difference now is literally 1 centimetre, which over this whole curve is going to be nice and easy to ease it on. So I want to make a sample now and see exactly how this looks. So as I said, this was a long-winded approach to get such a basic shape, but I know now by doing it that the length of my back and front are going to be correct. I know it's going to fit across my bust. I know all these proportions are going to be right. You can just draw this freehand, but if I flip the back over the front, you can see that actually the shape is quite different. The back is longer, the curve is different. These are things that I wouldn't have known to do. So I am going to just put the right sides together. Let's open it up to this just one big piece. So the 2 pins there indicate that's my back neck. So I'm going to fold it over. So that is my back there. And again, you can see that this is narrower here than the front. I've got more width on my front than my back. And all I need to do on both sides is just join this up. So my front was slightly bigger than my back when I measured it, but you can see in this kind of drapey fabric that that is so easy to ease on. So I'm just going to get both sides sewn up and then I can try it on.
And you obviously saw it before, but here it is again. And what I was saying when I was doing the pattern about opening it up to that straight line, that actually if you bring your pattern further up, I hope that makes any kind of sense, it opens this up more, and then you could have even more folds in here. You could literally cut this in a full circle like you would a circle skirt and have loads of volume here. There's so much you can play around with this kind of design if you really love draping. So anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd had a few requests about dolman sleeves and how to do them, so I thought it would be a great video to do. It's been a challenge to work out how to show all of this, but I've really enjoyed doing it and I hope you've enjoyed watching it too. If you have, make sure you check out my other videos and make sure you subscribe, as I'm always uploading new videos. I try to get a new one up every single week.